Okay, so hello, I am Claire Patterson, and this is my presentation on the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. So starting off with some background on Italy in the 20th century, which was ruled by the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. And Mussolini desired for an extensive Italian empire that would live up to the success of the Roman Empire before it. And he wanted this empire, instead of extending into the rest of Europe, to expand out into the Mediterranean and northeastern Africa. And Mussolini was also particularly displeased with past Italian military performances and wanted to avenge these losses so that Italy could be seen as a military power equivalent to the UK or France. And obviously this conflict was with Ethiopia, so it's also important to understand some of the background on Ethiopia in the earliest 20th century as well. So the country at the time was ruled by Emperor Haile Selassie, and at the time it was one of the few remaining independent African nations, as many of them had been taken under the rule of imperialist countries during the period of time known as the Scramble for Africa. And in terms of its location, it was kind of trapped between these two Italian-held nations of Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. And it also wasn't a particularly powerful nation in terms of its military, but it was rich in resources, making it a prime target for Italian invasion. And of course, this conflict we're discussing is the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, so it's also important to understand the first time that these two nations clashed in the First Italo-Ethiopian War. So this conflict took place in 1895 to 1896, about 20 years after the unification of Italy. And this newly formed Italian nation wanted to control Ethiopia and other regions in East Africa as part of that scramble for Africa that I mentioned earlier. Italy, however, lost this war, and the decisive battle was the Battle of Adawa, which is one of these losses that angered Mussolini and that he sort of desired revenge for, because as you can see from this cartoon here, this projected weakness and made Italy sort of look like a weak nation, and Mussolini desired to project strength. And so that takes us to the beginnings of the Second Italo-Ethiopian War with the conflict at Wal. So Italy and Ethiopia had both agreed to this treaty in 1928, which made them both members of the League of Nations, and then also designated their border between Italian Somaliland and Ethiopia along the Benadir coast. However, Italy didn't really intend to keep the promise that they gave in this treaty, and in 1930 breached this border to build a fort at the Wal Oasis in the Ogaden Desert, which you can see by the cross on the map to your left. And while this didn't immediately spark a fight, tensions did escalate over time. And in 1934, tensions escalated into violence and shots were officially fired. This resulted in fighting, which resulted in the death of 150 Ethiopian soldiers and about 30 Italian and Italian Somali soldiers. And so after this conflict, the League of Nations investigated the incident as both nations were members and shouldn't really be fighting each other. And after this investigation, they found that Italy was the clear aggressor of the conflict since they breached the terms of this treaty that they had. However, the League of Nations exonerated both parties and no disciplinary action was taken towards Italy. And this was primarily because nations Britain and France feared this Italian-German alliance. They wanted to keep Italy on their side because at the time in Germany, Adolf Hitler was coming to power, and Britain and France kind of knew they were going to have to go up against him at some point and wanted to keep Italy on their side. And so now that Italy knew that they could get away with this kind of behavior without a response from the League of Nations, they began to build up their military. And they also signed this treaty with France, which gave them more power and influence in Africa. So Italy, having this really favorable position, on October in 1935 at 5 a.m., the Italian general Emile de Bono crossed the river into Ethiopia. And even though Italy did this without a prior declaration of war, after they invaded, Ethiopia did declare war on Italy. So now that these two countries are actively at war, Italy continued to advance through Ethiopia, and General de Bono won some victories and made some slow advances into Ethiopia. And he won a particularly important battle at Ottawa, where they had previously lost in the First Italo-Ethiopian War. Although, despite winning this victory, Mussolini wanted a faster progress from the military and replaced de Bono with General Pietro Badoglio in December to speed up the advance, which, as you can see from this map here to your right, the blue arrows show de Bono's advance, and then the green arrows show Badoglio's advances. And so clearly he was much more effective, as these maps show advances over about the same period of time. So he was much faster, as Mussolini desired, which did allow for Italian victory. And so while Italy's military was dominant to Ethiopia's, some military support from the Nazis for Ethiopia allowed them to hold off Italian troops for a few weeks. However, because the Italian military was so dominant, they had a lot more advanced artillery and just a lot more supplies in general. And they also utilized some inhumane military strategies that we'll discuss in a second. They were unable to stop this Italian force from pushing forward. And so after a victory at the Battle of Maychu in March of 1936, it was pretty clear that Italy was going to win. And so in early May, as the Italian army was on their way, Emperor Selassie fled the country and went into exile before the Italian troops could arrive in the capital city of Addis Ababa. And these troops faced little resistance taking the city. So, like I mentioned earlier, Italy is using some inhumane military strategies to secure this victory. And most of this was by the use of phosphine and mustard gases, which are both really toxic and poisonous gases, which are both prohibited by the Geneva Conventions. And I am actually a biochemistry major, so I thought it would be fun to give a little bit of background on why mustard gas is actually so toxic. So this is the structure of mustard gas, and its official chemical name is bis-2-chloroethyl sulfide. And what this does is that once it gets into your bloodstream through inhalation, it is able to get into the nucleus of our cells, and it will actually react with our DNA to form this really, really dangerous type of damage called an intrastrand crosslink, where basically these DNA bases that are supposed to be interacting with each other get irreversibly linked together by this mustard gas molecule. And basically when this happens in our cells a bunch of times, we have these signals that go off saying that our DNA is super, super damaged and that the cell needs to die. And so all the cells with this really high level of damage will die. And so essentially when you inhale this gas, your cells all become really damaged and enter this apoptosis pathway and essentially kill themselves. And so these gases are really, really deadly, and they're one of the main reasons that Italy was able to take the capital city and win all of these battles so quickly and so decisively. And so the aftermath of this conflict is that Ethiopia was incorporated with Entree and Italian Somaliland into Italian East Africa. And this is their flag to the right. And Emperor Selassie also remained in exile until after the Second World War, when Ethiopia sought its independence. The main outcome of this war, however, was the weakness that it exposed in the League of Nations, as larger countries like Britain and France, who were supposed to prevent conflicts like this from happening, were instead allowing them to continue, and in some ways encouraging Italy to do this, as they feared Italy would turn to the United States or Germany for support And this also sort of foreshadowed the coming of the Second World War by pointing out all of these weaknesses in the League of Nations. And so that is all for my presentation. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed.